Yo, what's going on everybody? It's your boy Naruto Explain here, bringing you guys another Boruto Naruto Next Generation discussion on the fallout from Boruto chapter 80, and today I want to bring you guys a discussion requested by one of my patrons that I do believe is going to strike up a good conversation with you guys. So my patron, after reading chapters 79 and chapter 80, believes that they've cracked the long-term storytelling setup that will be prominent in Boruto Part 2. Once we get away from the larger current problems that we have in the manga right now, i.e. Code and Kawaki. So as we all know, in chapter 79, Ada unleashed her shinjutsu on the world and had everyone believe that Boruto killed Naruto and Hinata and that Kawaki was Naruto's son instead of Boruto. And in chapter 80, Sarada awakened her mangekyou sharingan and was able to convince Sasuke to protect Boruto, which led to Ada giving Boruto a free pass in which she won't look for Boruto while they're away from Konoha, but that after he returns, all bets are going to be off. While Ada did say she was going to try and make amends for this, my patron believes that Ada is about to be at the center of a much larger threat in the Boruto time skip, and that when we look back at the story, we're going to see Boruto chapter 79 as being an absolute game changer. So according to my patron, they say that when Ada used her shinjutsu, it sent off a signal to the Otsutsuki realm out there because of the nature of the shinjutsu itself is only linked to Shibai Otsutsuki himself. Now, I do think that we have something here when we really go back and look at Ada's shinjutsu as it was being used. I pointed this out when the chapter dropped, but there was a very intentional panel that showed a surge of chakra coming from Ada, and it expanded not just around the land of fire, but we get a shot all the way from outer space. It shows the chakra ring going around the entire planet, and there are points of chakra shooting out opposite ends of the planet that also go off into space as well. I'd originally thought that that surge of chakra might be something that eventually reaches its way to the dimension that Shibai is located in, since you don't drop Shibai by name and not pay that off at some point later on in the series, and we know that chakra can travel through different dimensions. We saw that in Naruto's manga. However, I didn't consider this being a signal that could actually reach the Otsutsuki in space, but I do think that there is some merit here to the concern that my patron has raised. Just think about it for a moment. When Momoshiki was sitting there and catching a whole vibe, eating a chakra fruit, watching a planet die off in the distance, Kinshiki showed up and said that he became aware of a change in the space-time curvature in the sector that Kaguya was supposed to be harvesting in. Momoshiki gave him the side eye and basically said, hold up, we need to go check this out. That disturbance likely was a battle against Kaguya that happened at that point in the timeline 15 years ago, which we saw several dimension shifting attacks, but there are other things going on in that battle as well. You had 3 people become a 10-tailed Shinchuriki during that time. You had Hagoromo's ghost coming from beyond the grave and interacting with the living, and that ghost was using its chakra more than once. You had all these massive amounts of chakra flaring up in multiple dimensions around this sector. It took years to actually detect, but Kinshiki was eventually made aware of the disturbance and they made their way to Earth. Assuming that the chakra can move through space similar to how radio waves do is not the craziest thing to say that chakra moves at an exceedingly faster pace than electromagnetic radio waves do. Given that Ada used that massive shinjutsu of this scale that is actually power that belongs to Shibai, it very likely could travel at a faster rate than the amounts of chakra disturbance that Kinshiki became alerted to 15 years later after it happened. You guys hear me say a lot terms like Chekhov's gun and other literature terms, mostly because of my background as a former editorial assistant, but it applies here as well. There were quite a few ways to show the shinjutsu effects being traveled across a long distance, even when you show so from a global perspective, but almost half the page was shown with that lone single panel showing the perspective from outer space, far away from outer space, which could be a setup for more Otsutsuki. We know based off of Ishiki's dimension that there are 2 more Otsutsuki that we do not know about and we've yet to see appear in the series itself. That in of itself is another Chekhov's gun. Those 2 characters have to be addressed at some point in the series, and we just happen to have a character in Kawaki who wants to destroy all the Otsutsuki. Things do line up when you look at it from that perspective, but it makes even more sense when we consider the folklore that's been associated with all the Otsutsuki we met in Boruto. All the Otsutsuki from Boruto, they all have links that tie back to the Taro folktale. Since I've already gone in depth on the Otsutsuki clan mythology and folklore in a video that you see on the screen here, I won't repeat in detail the points that were made in that, but for instance, Urashiki was based off of Urashima Taro, and the Dragon King Palace and some of his jutsu come directly from that folklore. Momoshiki was based off of Momotaro, the Peach Boy, which is why his golem looks like a monkey, why his peasant looks like a bird of fire, and why the giant dogs they used to attack Sasuke look like how they do. Sticking to Boruto, he's currently Momoshiki's vessel, and given how much Momoshiki borrows from the folklore that inspired his character, we have to look at how this could link back to Ada's shinjutsu, reaching out to the other Otsutsuki, potentially the two missing Otsutsuki itself. In the folklore, Momotaro the Peach Boy gathers allies and ends up fighting off ogres that threaten villages in his area, and he reclaims this village that was overrun by the ogres. Kishimoto's original design for Fused Momoshiki was based off of an ogre, and the light novels, multiple of them refer to the Otsutsuki as ogres or celestial beings. The terms are used interchangeably. So far in the series, we've covered all of the major Taro folklore, from the Kaguya Hime, i.e. Kaguya, to Ishin Boshi, i.e. Ishiki, but there are a few left that haven't been used yet. You have Kachi Kachiyama, you have Shippei Taro, you have Chikara Taro, and you have Rai Taro. Those are the ones that we haven't seen in the series so far being used for Otsutsuki, but a close look at each of these does show that they're candidates that could be used for inspiration behind the two missing Otsutsuki. The same ones might catch Ada's chakra signature being fired off using Ishiki, being fired off using Shibai's Shinjutsu. Chikara Taro carries a giant club and defeats the man who challenges him, and they eventually become companions, one of which carries a literal chapel on his back. They find a weeping woman whose father was killed. Chikara Taro kills the monster who killed her father, and he ends up marrying her. Shippei Taro has cat demons in one version of the story that demand human sacrifices once per year, but they fear Shippei Taro, who joins forces with a warrior to defeat the evil cat spirits. Shippei Taro is a play on Shippei, a piece of bamboo used to discipline monks in Buddhism, and it's worth noting in that folklore is similar to what you see with the god tree, where human sacrifices are needed for the god tree, just as those cat demons needed human sacrifices as well. Something to keep your eyes on there. Raitaro is the son of a thunder god who ends up having to go live with humans so he can learn about humans and teach them of the way of the gods. And he has to make a choice between living with warriors who cause death and destruction, living with the beautiful princess whose life is nothing but comfort, living in a temple with monks where discipline is going to be mandatory, and living amongst peasants, which will be a much harder upbringing but one filled with the most love, which is what Raitaro chooses. Finally, we have the one that I think is the most interesting and the most likely to be used here, which is going to be the Kachi Kachiyama story, which is a story about a rabbit getting revenge on a raccoon dog. Now, this one stands out to me the most, obviously because Kaguya has links to a rabbit. Momoshiki, one of his summonings, is a raccoon-like dog, and Boruto just happens to have Momoshiki inside of him. And there's use of a mallet in this story, a mallet used for killing. Kawaki is the vessel for Ishiki. Ishiki has a mallet on his clothes as well as on his actual body. The raccoon uses a mallet in this story and does severe harm to one of the characters, just like Kawaki did severe harm to Boruto. Now, in this story, the raccoon dog eats a lot of rice that belongs to an old married couple, eats up their field. He betrays the trust of the wife by beating her to death with a mallet, and then he torments the husband, who he believes actually wronged him for stringing him up for eating up his rice field. The rabbit in this story sees the old man crying, and he gets revenge on the raccoon dog, and he tricks the raccoon dog by setting him up to drown to death. And as he's begging for his life, the rabbit hits the raccoon dog over the head with an oar, the same way the raccoon dog hit that wife over the head with the mallet, thus killing the raccoon dog. The lesson of the story is obviously, if you do wrong to others, you will eventually be wronged yourself. I think we can kind of see how that kind of links up with Kawaki. In this story, we have a few things. We have the rabbit, Kaguya, we have the raccoon dog, one of Momoshiki's attacks, and one of Momotaro's allies in the folklore that inspired Boruto's version of Momoshiki, which is also our link to Boruto. Finally, we have the mallet. Ishin Boshi had a mallet in the folklore. Ishiki has a mallet on his chest, on the back of his clothes. It's a wish-granting mallet. Kawaki currently has Ishiki's powers, and he uses Ada's shinjutsu in order to grant his deepest and darkest wish, which is to be Naruto's son, and for Boruto to be the one that's the outsider. I do believe my patron's right here. This could be what ends up having inspiration taken behind the next pair of Otsutsuki if we take it a step further and we start incorporating some of the folklore. The table's really set for it when you take a deep look at it. Kachi Kachiyama is a story of revenge. The Otsutsuki have come to Earth countless times trying to harvest it. According to their clan law, they're supposed to harvest planets, and the ones who have appeared during Naruto's lifetime, they've all been killed. In 16 years, 5 different Otsutsuki have been killed when they tried to harvest a chakra fruit. Kaguya got her chakra drained to absolute zero, which led to Zetsu declaring her dead, saying that he needs to resurrect her from death in the manga before Naruto said, nope, you go join Kaguya. Momoshiki and Kinshiki died, Urashiki died, Ishiki died. The idea of this many Otsutsuki dying in such a short span, back to back, especially in the Boruto era, is enough to have there be a cause for revenge, especially given that we were told there is a main branch of the clan that's aware of what's happening on Earth. That in and of itself can be used as a foundation for the folklore being added into the story. If there are more Otsutsuki coming, Momoshiki is once again back in the position he was in when he was dealing with Ishiki. He has to keep Boruto alive or else he gets fed to the Ten Tails. Right now, his soul is attached to Boruto. He can't come back to life, which means it's in his best interest to do what he can to keep Boruto from getting fed to a Ten Tails. Momoshiki said in the chapter, Boruto's now 100% Otsutsuki and the perfect candidate to be fed to the Ten Tails. We just happen to have an Otsutsuki worshipping nut job in code who won't hesitate to work with a pair of new Otsutsuki who show up because he view it as following Ishiki's will. Obviously, right now we can't say with certainty this is going to be the foundation for the 2 missing Otsutsuki, but I do think there's a good argument for where the inspiration behind them could come into play, just following the pattern of what we had in the past with the other Otsutsuki, in particular how most of them have folklore that paints them as heroes, and Masashi Kishimoto flips on his head to make them into villains, like he did with some of the 6 paths jutsu, in particular some of the jutsu that are used by the 6 paths of pain. I'm curious to know what you guys think about my patron's idea that Ada Shinjutsu sent off a signal for more Otsutsuki, and what do you guys think about me adding the mythology aspect to this? Do you think any of these folklore might be used to give a story for the 2 missing Otsutsuki? While you think that over, click here to watch this other Naruto Explained video.